Hello, good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to Decolonizing Law, an interdisciplinary series of public lectures on topics concerned with the relationships between law, race, imperialism, colonialism, anti-imperialism, and the anti-post-colonialism. I am Alonso Gurmendi from UCL. I am delighted to introduce this lecture series, which offers a stellar all-women lineup of amazing speakers. Today's lecturer is Fabia Fernandes Carvalho, and this series has also had the presence of Vasuki Nisaya, Liliana Obregon, Mindy Chen Wishart, Tendai Chumi, Asli Bali, and Aicha Chubukchu. Future lectures will include Amaya Alves Marin and Vidya Kumar. Today, Fabia will be speaking about contesting intervention in Latin America. Upcoming lectures will discuss the rights of nature in the Chilean Constitution and revolution in international law. Everyone is welcome to attend live. A recording of most of the lectures will be posted online on the website for the lectures. This lecture will be recorded, and participants are free to ask questions using the Q&A function, but we will not be identifying who is making the question. I would like to offer my warmest thanks to my colleagues Lisa Penfold, Jessica Long, Danielle McFarlane, and Kat Balogan for their outstanding work setting up these lectures. Today's speaker is Dr. Fabia Fernandes Carvalho. Fabia holds a PhD in international law from the University of Sao Paulo. She was a postdoctoral fellow with the laureate program in international law at Melbourne Law School. And before joining the laureate program, she was an assistant professor of international relations at the Federal University of Sao Paulo. And she's a member of the editorial collectives of Twale Review and VRU World Comparative Law, and joins us now from Sao Paulo. Her lecture today is entitled Contested Intervention in Latin America, and we are delighted to have Fabia with us, and me in particular, as she's a good friend. So I am very much forward to listening to her lecture, and I will give now the floor to you, Fabia, so that you can tell us about contested intervention in Latin America.
Great, thank you, Alonso, for this warm introduction. And let me also thank Ralph Wild for the invitation, Lisa, Kat, and everyone that was involved in organizing this. It's indeed an amazing series of lectures, and I'm really proud to be giving a talk here. So the project I'll be commenting on has to do with my research period in Melbourne, and I hope to be finishing it soon. So contesting intervention in Latin America assesses the emergence and circulation of the principle of non-intervention in the region in the 20th century. The project explores the ways in which Latin American lawyers engaged with the vocabulary of international law, aiming to challenge practices of foreign intervention in Latin America. This is a historical exploration of regional understandings of non-intervention, and it seeks to open space for critically grasping the role of international law in projects of spatial ordering. It also aims to enable a detailed interrogation about the different regional sensibilities that are being articulated in Latin America today under the international legal vocabulary. So it's a historical exploration, but this is not a project that is being conducted out of historical curiosity. I have deep presentist interrogations about our region and about the ways in which international law has been used as a vocabulary, enabling us to imagine, I hope, new futures and new possibilities for our region. So this is a clear mix in a way that has been put by Anne Orford. It clearly connects past and present, and that's the main reason I am undertaking this project as a way, when we look at the past, as a way to find space in our heads for political imagination. So I think this is the first thing I really wanted to be clear about. This is a project about the circulation of legal ideas, concepts, and interpretations in the region, aiming to somehow open space for new thinking about the present in Latin America. Intervention has been a key issue in our region, historically and up to the present. And international lawyers from Latin America have engaged with the legal vocabulary as a way to resist interventions from European powers and then from the US, mostly the US in the 20th century. In this sense, I'm dealing here with ideas of elite people from Latin America. So this is also another thing that it's important to mention. It's hard to see these legal interventions by Latin American lawyers as genuine decolonial interventions. I don't think that is actually possible. But I do believe that going deeper into the details of our past engagements with international law enables us to rethink the uses of the international legal vocabulary in the region. So just to illustrate what I mean by this Latin American lawyers, I have a few photos that I wanted to share with you as a way to contextualize this general description of the project. So who are we talking about when we are exploring this international lawyers from the region? So I hope you can all see this. It's I hope it works, the sharing of the screen. These are photos from 1912, and they were taken by the occasion of the first meeting of the International Commission of American Jurists, the Rio Commission, precisely because it's based in Rio de Janeiro. It was created in the context of the Pan-American conferences, and this effort of having international law as a very important vocabulary to deal with the challenges of our region. So this today is an organ that belongs to the Inter-American system. It's still based in Rio, but I just wanted you to have a look on the kind of people that I'm going to be dealing with in this project about non-intervention in Latin America. So we have all these delegates from Latin American countries that were participating in this Rio Commission meeting, and also US delegates, people that were concerned with, at this time, mainly the codification of public and private international law in Latin America. I actually love this one, and I'm going to stop here. I think this is very telling of what of the limits of what we can think in terms of this engagement with international law from Latin American lawyers. So of course, this is a picnic at the Tijuca forest in Rio de Janeiro, and these people are gathering in 1912 with this first meeting of the Rio Commission of American Jurists. As we can see, this is something I would say typical to bring the people to this place in Rio, which is amazing. But we can see that we are talking about people from the elites dealing with the main questions related to how we can modernize Latin America, how this colonial condition can be left in the past, and we can finally be a developed, or this was not the term of the moment, but how we can actually be fully integrated into the international family of nations. So I think this photo just depicts perfectly what Liliana Obregon has called the Creole legal consciousness. And this is the type of people I'm going to be dealing with in the project. So these contestations of foreign interventions in Latin America, despite even being possible to assess differences in terms of political sensibilities, from the three lawyers that I'm going to be analyzing their ideas, it's not possible to say that we are talking here about super progressive people and people that really wanted to revolutionize what was going on in Latin America. So this is a very elitist project focused on international law, a deep engagement with international law as something that can actually bring stuff, can bring concrete results in Latin America, and therefore it's actually pretty hard to call this even if there is a resistance sensibility, these were not revolutionaries. Let me also say that these lawyers, these Latin American lawyers, they were also they shared a certain anti-imperialistic sensibility in regards to the United States. But this is also a very interesting feature in the Latin American context, this sensibility against the US imperialism had different political perspectives. In Brazil, we had monarchists against US imperialism, whereas in other parts of Latin America, there were more progressive people engaging with this anti-imperialism sensibility. So this is not an obvious region, and it's not fully obvious how we can locate these international lawyers. But let me just say that these engagements with international law are related to modernizing projects, to actually, as I said, somehow terminate the colonial condition of Latin America. This had interesting potentials, creativity, but also important limitations, and especially in terms of internal colonialism and issues that were actually being reproduced in terms of these elites in each country in Latin America. So the issue of intervention is pretty old in our region, and I just wanted to show here this super interesting exhibition from the 80s, somehow presenting a timeline of US intervention in Central and Latin America as a resistance by artists to US imperialism in the region. So this was a very intense time of manifestation against US interventions, and as part of what was called at the time an artist's call against US imperialism, a group of artists, Group Material, it's their name, prepared this exhibition to somehow put together all the US interventions in the region from the early 19th century until the 20th century. So this is a pretty long story. It has somehow structured we as Latin Americans, and also our faith in engaging with international law as a way to somehow resist these interventions. So this is just to put into context, this is a long story and not just about Russia and Ukraine. It has, of course, a much more broader implication. All sorts of narratives were put as a way to justify these interventions, and I think this is also a very good image to clearly depict what I'm trying to do here. The American flag has not been planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. So this is about the situation in Cuba at the turn of the 20th century, and I hope you all can see the differences under somehow the American flag, as it's put here, a much more ordered, civilized Cuba, whereas at least on my left side, there is a bit of chaos, and of course, this is not for humanity's sake. So we have been experiencing these interferences all over Latin America. Of course, there are differences from South America to Central America. Juan Pablo Scarfi has also explored these differences in the US interference in the region. So it's also hard to treat the whole story as a monolithic Latin American kind of thing. We have differences when we are dealing with Central America, differences that are pretty important. So let me now, given this, as I have given this general description of the project, just a few words about the ways I'm thinking on spatial ordering, regionalism, and why I think this is deeply important to understand the specifics of the Latin American context. So regionalism and the notion of the region in a way has been an in-between concept, something that is a middle ground between the nation and the universal. This is just an example from Edward Carr, Nationalism and After, and it is completely related to an European discussion. But in this passage here, we can see precisely this the possibilities of the region and as something that would be, as he says, operative in the transition from nationalism to internationalism. So lots of factual presuppositions are related to this notion of region, that people would somehow share ideas, sensibilities, political perspectives, and it would be much easier to deal with any sort of collective venture if we consider the spatial dimension of the region instead of going straight to the universal. So as this in-between concept, the region as this in-between concept, we can think of it as a somehow depoliticized legal space of consensus and effectiveness, this middle ground alternative between the respect for sovereignty and a future universalistic global law to be realized through international institutions. No? So in a way, it's pretty convenient to have the region as this more concrete possibility for a future universalism. Of course, we know that it's pretty much not like this like-mindedness of those who live in the region, in a way that we are somehow deducing effects of this geographical commonality, and then we would be able to have, for instance, a regional international law, as it has been discussed by Latin American lawyers traditionally, Alejandro Alvarez, and the idea of a Latin American international law. So this, in a way, the possibilities of having the region as a paving the way for universalism based on this shared sensibilities of those who live in the region. Actually, we can oppose that to other issues. The region as a threat to the universality of international law. Something that might not go into the direction of this this universal system. So how can we actually assure that this desirable progress into the universal is something that is going to happen actually with this, under this conception of region? So this, for me, it's really, really important, and it's important to try to conceptualize the idea of region, precisely because in Latin America, the political imagination that has been carried out through the engagement with international law has used this spatial dimension of the region. Many, many political projects that have been somehow ordered through international law have the region as the spatial dimension of this project. So in Latin America, it does make a lot of sense to actually change our spatial perspective to the region, because international lawyers have really articulated the regional perspective as a way to put forward their political projects, being resistance to interventions, being other political projects, as I will try to mention, sorry, very soon with my 3 concrete examples that I also want to comment with you. So it makes sense to shed light on these regional sensibilities, as this can show us imaginations for Latin America that were put forward with, again, the engagement of international law, but under this idea of a region. So look, I'm looking at past experiences of these regional imaginations, of these regional ways of conceiving Latin America. And I'm gonna do this, you just looking at my time here. I'm gonna do this through three symptomatic examples. So let me also say that this is not a pure historical research, a history of ideas kind of research, but I'm approaching these legal interpretations by 3 international lawyers, the kinds of that we have seen having the picnic at the Tijuca forest. But they were not there, but it's the kind of sensibility that I want to stress with you. So I'm looking at the ideas of three international lawyers, three different interpretations of non-intervention. These interpretations have been circulating, and I'm trying to understand also the material conditions that were related to these ideas of international law in Latin America, of how we can resist intervention in Latin America through the vocabulary of international law. So my first lawyer is Luis Maria Drago from Argentina. This is the photo that hangs at the wall of the historical archives of the Foreign Ministry and Worship in Buenos Aires. And this is Drago. Drago is somehow famous in international law because of the Drago doctrine. So all his ideas about the forcible collection of debt under international law, especially under his commentary on the Venezuelan blockade on the 1902-1903 by three European powers, Germany, England, and Italy. Drago became famous as he wrote a note to another Argentine diplomat in Washington, precisely criticizing the European powers for using force to collect debt, Venezuelan debt in that case. And Drago showed his, not just his solidarity with Venezuela, but also the legal implications of such an intervention by European powers. To Drago, this was not possible under international law to use force to collect debt. And his note was published, became famous. Other Latin American jurists circulated the note at the time, Carlos Calvo at the Institut de Droit International. So we had a pretty interesting campaign of spreading the ideas of Drago about the Venezuelan blockade. This is a key moment in the history of the region, as we have a very strong change in geopolitical terms with the rise of the US as the hegemon of the region, and the Monroe Doctrine being discussed as a possibility for actually not having these European powers intervening in the region. So here there is another image from those days. Venezuela crying out for help to the US, and they say, okay, the Monroe Doctrine can help you, Sunny, but it won't help you with your honest debts. So the whole thing became a very technical discussion about the kinds of debt that were at stake with the Venezuelan blockade, what kind of how international law could actually allow these European powers to collect debt. So we had issues related to alien protection, but also public bonds issued by Venezuela that were at stake in the Venezuelan blockade. So that, and then Drago goes into the details of discussing these types of debts, these types of obligations actually, and asserting the possibilities of using force to collect these debts. So it's very strategical and somehow doctrinal, the approach of Drago to discuss the Venezuelan blockade, as he go into the technicalities of each obligation each obligation that is related to the blockade, to conclude that the main issue at stake with the Venezuelan blockade are the public bonds that were issued by Venezuela. And as a sovereign country, you cannot have other sovereign countries interfering to collect debts related to public bonds. So we have a clash of sovereignties. International law provides for formal equality between states. So it's impossible to consider this intervention legal and an international law. So the story actually ends up with an arbitration. It's a more or less known story, but what interests me is precisely how Drago tried to accommodate his reaction to this intervention, his resistance to the intervention by European powers, and at the same time being fully aware of the changes in geopolitical conditions and the rise of the US. He somehow tried to accommodate the role of Latin American countries in this context. So Drago did not contested the grammar of the Monroe Doctrine, but he somehow, in his writings, accommodates the fragile, as he says, republics of the Latin American region, and try to condemn the European. He condemns the European intervention, but he's not fully going against the US and the US policy in those days. So this is, as I said in the beginning, this is in terms of political sensibility, this is not a revolutionary here, this is resistance, but a very accommodating way of resisting through a very technical and doctrinal assessment of the international legal issues that were at stake in the Venezuelan blockade. This is just for you guys to say, this is a draft of the Drago note that we can see at the historical archives in Buenos Aires. So he really worked a lot on the text of this note. He was very cautious on what kind of message he wanted to actually give to the world in terms of how to assess the international legal issues that were at stake with the Venezuelan blockade. So it wasn't just a mere coincidence. I've been asked this in the past, but who was this Drago? He was just there for, I don't know. No, it was a very clear strategy of putting forward his ideas related to resisting the intervention of European powers. So this is my first international lawyer, and the second is the Mexican Zidro Fabela. And again, I'm not aiming at any comprehensiveness or a strict chronology here in terms of going in a very trying to be exactly comprehensive about this. So I have chosen these three international lawyers because the ways in which their ideas about non-intervention are articulated actually brings to the surface many issues related to the Latin American context, and they all articulated this regional vision of international law, using international law under this different mode of spatial ordering. So this having the region as something central for their political projects. So here we can see a different context in terms of political sensibility. Zidro Fabela is a very important international lawyer from Mexico. Here we can see his in a younger moment, he was part of the Mexican. He took part of the Mexican Revolution, and he wrote extensively about international law. He was also a diplomat, and he was the Mexican delegate at the League of Nations when the Spanish Civil War was going on. And this is a very interesting strategy of engaging with an international institution and international legal vocabulary as a way to somehow internationalize the project of the Mexican Revolution. So we are now changing context completely. And as I said, I'm following these interesting interpretations of non-intervention as a lawyer. So I'm not doing this for the sake of historical truth or trying to be comprehensive, but I'm trying to map the circulation of this idea of non-intervention. So Zidro Fabela and Mexico in general, had a very interesting engagement with the League of Nations, actually denouncing what in their vision would be a mistaken engagement with the Spanish Civil War by the British and the French, that had defended a strict non-intervention policy. So Mexico contested almost alone at the League of Nations this policy of non-intervention by the British and the French in regards to the Spanish Civil War, asserting that it would be possible to legally help the Spanish Republic without problems with the legal principle of non-intervention. So it was a very interesting engagement with international law, using the international sphere as a very strategic place for the ideals of this post-revolutionary moment in Mexico. So to put it in a nutshell, the way Mexico defended the principle of non-intervention in regards to the legal treatment of the Spanish Civil War had a very specific objective, as putting forward a super legalistic, actually this is important to mention, putting forward a super legalistic view of non-intervention. The idea was to have this interpretation used in light of the domestic situation in Mexico in regards to the nationalization of oil. So Mexico, at the same time they were doing this defense of the Spanish Republic at the League, there were projects of nationalizing oil. We know that Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution established that subsoil resources would be, they are the property of the sovereign nation of Mexico. So there was a huge change in terms of how we could have the industry of oil in Mexico, not having US companies or foreign companies exploring this mineral resource. So this was a very interesting strategy of using this interpretation of non-intervention at the League. And as this would be accepted, this would maybe easier. It would be easily applied to Mexico in regards to US claims against this project of the nationalization of oil in Mexico. So here I would say the political sensibility has changed from Drago. Here we can see a more progressive project in terms of politics, a clearer stance against the US instead of having the more accommodating sensibility of Drago. But still, Fabela takes Drago's interpretation on non-intervention and he expands it in a way that they could have their policy of nationalization and somehow resisting future claims by foreign companies. So we can see a much more progressive sensibility at stake here. But again, we are talking about projects that are fully focused on the Latin American state, with a huge engagement with international law, this faith in international law as something that could somehow change and achieve change in the world. So of course there are limits to what we can do with this arrangements. But in any case, comparing to Drago, we can see a more interesting political sensibility here. And of course, this has to do with the amazing moment of the Mexican Revolution and the post-revolutionary moment, something that has for sure marked Latin America in deep ways. So this is just a note, just a quick mention to this, as I need to finish with my Chilean lawyer. But this is a Mexico and Fabela. They were super active at the League and presenting their interpretations of the conflict and how the Mexican position would be right. It would be legally accepted to aid the Spanish Republic, and precisely the policy of non-intervention actually would be an intervention in the conflict, precisely the opposite. So Mexico did the magic of international legal argumentation. They justified their aid to the Spanish Republic whereas saying that that aid was not in violation with the principle of non-intervention. So this is very, in a way, sophisticated legal interpretation, and lots of energy were put into this engagement with the League of Nations. The Mexican delegates were pretty active at the League, and this was a moment of internationalizing the ideals of the Mexican Revolution. So very rich and intense context in which international law was really articulated as something that could achieve positive stuff, especially for the domestic situation in Mexico. So my last figure, my last lawyer in this project, and again, I'm jumping in terms of time, and I'm just trying to trace this circulation of the non-intervention idea. I'm going to Chile under Salvador Allende's government, and here we can see a deep, I would say, a more radical perspective in terms of how we can understand non-intervention and how international law can actually be used as a form of resistance. So this is Eduardo Novoa Monreal. He was Allende's legal advisor, and he was actually responsible for the domestic policy of the nationalization of copper in Chile. So he designed the nationalization of copper, which was done through a constitutional reform in Chile. And here, this is a Brazilian newspaper. It says the lawyer of the third world, and I think it's the best description to get Eduardo Novoa Monreal, how we can make sense of his trajectory and his engagement with international law. So he was, from my other two figures, Drago and Fabela, were both diplomats and lawyers. This is something that was pretty common in Latin America for those days. But here we have someone, Eduardo Novoa Monreal was a criminal lawyer in the beginning of his career, and international law has actually entered the context later on, precisely because of the contestations of the Chilean nationalization of copper. So we have a criminal lawyer that engaged with many fields of law in a way to defend the interests of Chile and the third world. This is also something interesting here. It's possible to see mentions to the third world and Latin America, not just the region, but connections with other places in the third world, in the global south. And Novoa Monreal, as he designed this nationalization of copper, the discussion was the interventions by multinationals in the Chilean context, both in terms of political intervention, of political destabilization in Chile, but also the excessive profits that have been taken from Chile with the exploitation of copper by these multinationals. So this is really, really interesting, as we have somehow a change here with this idea of a private intervention via multinationals being put forward by this Chilean lawyer, who again wasn't a proper international lawyer, but international law entered the context later on, as he was the lawyer who defended Chile in an arbitration in Paris, as the companies who were exploiting copper in the country decided to bring this to arbitration to contest legally this project of nationalization, and international law became a huge part of this story. So these are two important books by Novoa Monreal, Law as an Obstacle to Social Change. So his discussion of how a traditional, a more positivistic view of law was actually a problem for Latin America, as law has to address issues and this more formal or traditional view of law wasn't able to actually cope with the challenges of Latin America. And then we have the struggle for copper, his legal commentary on how this project was structured in Chile. And then he goes to international law because he had to defend Chile before this arbitration, and international law became part of the story. So we have this whole discussion of how can we discuss this exploitation of natural resources under international law if we can continue these arrangements of having foreign companies exploiting natural resources, having huge profits from these activities without any without giving back to, in case Chile, anything. So the discussion here was his main argument in this book, and I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes, Alonso, but his main arguments in this book were related to rules of international law not being absolutely clear about how these foreign companies could actually they could be compensated in light of these nationalization projects. So of course we had different views at stake. Actually, in Chile, they were saying that they wouldn't pay any effective compensation to these companies because they had earned so much profit in the past that they actually had to pay Chile even more money beyond the whole nationalization project. So his main task here is to actually go into the details of the rules of international law related to compensation, and then he concludes that international law does not have these clear rules that these foreign companies are asserting that international law assures them of effective compensation, but actually there is a sovereign right from these states like Chile to deal with their natural resources. So international law actually does not properly forbid these nationalizations. So this is as we go from Drago to Fabela and Novo a Monreal, I would say we have in terms of political sensibilities, somehow kind of radicalization might be too strong, but we have a move towards more progressive perspectives in terms of what is at stake with these interventions, from a more accommodating view with Drago, with Fabela's perspectives, also nationalization, and then under Novo a Monreal in Allende's, a very concrete experience and strong use of international law to actually justify these projects. So what I can see in this, going into this three interpretations of non-intervention, is first this kind of different political sensibilities, modes of resistance that somehow they go deeper, while when we move from the beginning of the 20th century to at the end Novo a Monreal in the 70s, and also challenges that are related to the Latin American region, state contracts, foreign investment, the nationalization of natural resources, public debt. So we have many issues that are related to political economy that are at the table here. So that's why these discussions about non-intervention are so productive. And looking at international law can bring these issues to the surface. So this is, I think, first, we can, of course, understand the past in more detail. And again, I'm thinking here about legal arguments. This is not a work of searching for historical truth exactly. So this is important to mention. I'm interested in this circulation of legal ideas, especially the legal principle of non-intervention, and all the Latin American issues that are related that were related to the contexts in which these interpretations were put forward. So we start with a more accommodating situation and passing through the Mexican experience and going to Chile to a kind of deeper engagement with projects of social change in the region, in which international law was an important part of the story. I'm gonna stop here as time flies, and I'm happy to answer questions, react to comments, and I hope this was productive, as at least for me, it is really interesting to engage with this super rich past of Latin American legal scholarship and practice. Thank you, Alonso.
Oh, thank you for this amazing presentation. It was extremely interesting, and I have a lot of questions of my own, but I will prioritize our our listeners, and then at some point I will steal some time for my own questions. So we have already 2 questions. So I will read them as they come, and you can answer them one by one, or you know, if you prefer, we can answer more than one at the same time. So the first question is, how could we reflect upon the concept of moment as a factor for change in international law? And are we living in one of those moments in regards to the Ukrainian war? And I remind viewers that I cannot identify you for legal reasons. Fabia?
Yeah, so moment, if I got it right, right, Alonso?
Yes,
Okay.
The concept of moment as a factor for change in international law, and are we living one of those moments today?
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but I have also opened the Q&A window here, and there is also another question about the Ukrainian war, and also a super interesting question about the connections of this Latin American sensibility to other experiences in the global South. So I think I will just try to. Okay. So I was waiting for this question about Russia, and I must say that yes, it was impossible not to get such a question. So as I tried to say, of course, intervention is a long story, no? And I think, at least for me now, a way to make sense of this is try to understand the conditions, in what kind of conditions we international lawyers actually approach a certain event of intervention, and the urgency and the gravity of this context, how we do this, how we justify our focus on these events. So of course, intervention is not a novelty. We can see people contesting the Russian intervention, but that had a completely different position when some time ago with the Iraq war. So these things are, of course, absolutely, it's really complicated to actually read and see certain statements by certain people in terms of the urgency of what's happening in Russia and the Ukrainian war. Of course, I know, I totally agree that this is an aggression, and it's clear in international law and so on and so forth. But I really question myself about the urgency and the kind of the special character of what's happening in Ukraine. Of course, it's in Europe, it's another story, but we that live in the global South, we know that there's no novelty in this. So I'm not sure if this is a moment for change in international law, as this has been such a repeated story, so old, so old. So the question for me would be, what are the conditions that actually put us international lawyers to assert this as a moment of change? Is this such a unique situation. I don't think so, of course, but still it's interesting to, at least I think, to go deeper into these interpretations. So I will stop with comments about Russia, as, to be honest, I think that this is a long story, and there are issues with asserting the uniqueness of what is happening right now, as we are having many other places, many other contexts, not just in the past, but right now, that are suffering similar situations, and the reactions are pretty different. Again, this is not to say that I defend Russia, but it's just this somehow selective urgency that strikes me. Fascinating question on the relationship, on how we can somehow make connections between this so many similar projects in the global south, in the third world, and how can we make connections about them. So the question here was about lawyer Mustafa Kamal's legal challenge to British colonialism at the turn of the 20th century. So I must say that I'm also taking note of all this, because this is super interesting to my own research. I must say that so far, and this is something that I think we Latin Americans have to go much deeper into it. At this moment, in the 70s and in the 60s, it was possible to see closer connections, or at least attempts to connect to other similar experiences in the third world. And I'm talking here about I'm just talking about international legal scholarship, about international lawyers. It would be a huge and super interesting research project to go in the archives and to see this debate between international law, and not just international lawyers, but also diplomats from the global south, to see how these connections were made, because the ideas were so similar and they were happening at the same time in different places in the third world. So this is a parallel that has to be done. It has to be done. And I wonder, I don't know, Alonso, if you would agree with me, but we can see many Latin American, like I will put just like statements or whatever, that reproduce the standard of civilization in a way that detach Latin America from the third world and actually put us closer to the Western Christian family of nations of international law. So despite these international lawyers that were doing some kind of interesting stuff, I'm pretty much in doubt about how we can make sense of this possible parallels. I think we have strong, even racist perspectives in Latin America in relation to Asia and Africa, and you can see this in many, even in Allende's speeches. I mean, this reproduction of the standard of civilization. So. This is something that I've also been talking to a friend about this lately. How we can make sense of these parallels. So I don't have much to say on the concreteness of this lawyer and his legal challenge to British colonialism. But I would love to have the chance to somehow go deeper into this and see if we can find more connections beyond this kind of Latin American reproduction of the standard of civilization. But many thanks, wonderful question. In the moment, I don't know what do you think, Alonso, if it was somehow, maybe I have already addressed that, or, okay, let's see if we can have more questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, and we have 4 minutes left, so I will read them really fast. Okay, so one here is, and I will ask you questions later, because I don't think I will have time to make my own questions, so I will send you an email. So we have a question saying, oh, this one's not really complete. Okay. Okay, it says the UN Special Rapporteur on Unilateral Coercive Measures states that sanctions on Venezuela have cut its income to export to 1% of what they were before sanctions. The UK courts block release of Venezuelan gold to assist those impoverished by sanctions because the UK government only recognizes Juan Guaido as head of state. How do you see such sanctions and measures within the context of neocolonialism?
Okay, yeah. Alonso, so I don't know where you are. Okay. No, wait. Where are you seeing these questions? Not in the Q&A, right? Because I have more here.
No, I have it in the Q&A. It's the last one I have.
So this was the Venezuelan, the release of the Venezuelan gold. This was the one, right? No. Yeah. Sure. Okay, Calvo's, yeah. Then there is one on Calvo's doctrine. Okay, ufa. Yeah. Okay, so it's when I was doing the research on the Venezuela, first it's going to be the first chapter of the book, no, the Drago and the Venezuelan blockade. It was just amazing how some things still repeat, no, over time. So this whole thing of recognition of Juan Guaido and the whole legal discussion that you could have in terms of the release of the Venezuelan gold, no. So this is it's of course it has a familiarity in terms of the repetition of a certain colonial mindset, for sure. It's something, there is something out there. But then I also think that there is one point that it's really, really important. No, these Latin American elite projects, they were also, this is why I really wanted to say stuff about the decolonial title of this series, as I'm not dealing with decolonialism in this research properly, no? And this is so because these are elite projects of modernization, and they do reproduce the colonial mindset internally, no? So this is these modernizing projects, even if we have some more room for progressive politics in a few cases, we cannot just put everything on neocolonialism, but also we have to consider how our own countries internally reproduce this mindset towards minorities and people that are, are those who have always suffered the consequences of this modernizing projects. So I think it's important, of course, to somehow recognize the reproduction of this mindset, but also the limitations of not including those domestic factors that are also related to this crisis in Venezuela, but also in other places in Latin America and in the global South more broadly.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. So it is, unfortunately, it is 4 p.m. already. I would stay and talk with you forever, but we cannot do that. So I am sorry for the questions that I wasn't able to read. I tried to select as many as I could. And thank you so much for your time and for being here. And thank you so much to everyone who came and participated. This has been Fabia's presentation. And well, until next time on March 14, when we will again be discussing decolonizing law. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Fabia.
Thank you, Alonso. Thank you all. Wonderful questions.